Welcome to Power Up Recovery with Nutrition. It is time to make nutrition part of the conversation. I'm your host, Christina Veselak, and I'm so glad you're here. Did you know that it's our brain's job to allow us to cope with stress gracefully? But to do that, it needs to be fed optimally. Have you ever wondered why so many committed people relapse or maybe even die? Why so many people on psychotropic medication still feel lousy and still have cravings? What if the missing piece is food, the right food? What if the right nutrients like amino acids or even eating protein every 4 hours could actually balance your brain chemistry and your mood without medication and support lasting recovery? In this podcast, we explore the powerful connection between feeding your brain well, mental health, relapse, and recovery from addiction. We will share insights from experts, inspiring recovery stories, and practical strategies you can use today. Whether you're in recovery, a healthcare professional, or someone passionate about emotional well being, this show is for you. Let's dive in and discover how fueling your body and brain with the right food, the right amino acids, and other key nutrients can fuel your transformation today. Welcome. Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Power Up Recovery with Nutrition. I am Christina Veselak, your host, and today I am delighted to introduce a dear friend of mine, Pati Reiss, who is a holistic recovery coach, chef, coach,
And
and chef,
coach.
with her own story.
Mm.
So if you like what you hear, please share this with your network and please like us. And I think subscribe to YouTube. Thank you.
Mm.
So today you're going to be hearing how food, as well as supplements, transformed Patty's recovery journey and has informed her life's work ever since she started her recovery journey. So here we go. Patty, welcome.
Oh, thank you, Christina. I'm delighted to be here. I always love connecting with you and sharing the power of nutrition and recovery. I mean,
Hmm.
it's profoundly changed my life, and as we know, many others as well too. But people need to get to it.
People do need to get to it.
Yep,
So can you share a little bit of your story with us? Kind of how you started on this journey?
absolutely, absolutely. Um, So I am a certified holistic health coach. I went to the Institute for Integrative Nutrition and I graduated in 2000. So quite a few 25 years ago. We're in 2025.
We
Um,
are.
However, even though I went to this school and I was fascinated by nutrition and health, and I was like, I think I found my nugget for life, right? I wanted to be a health coach. Um, my undergrad was in teaching, so I knew I wanted to teach as well too, but I didn't want to be in the school system. I taught second grade for a little while out in California, but then I found health coaching, and I was like, okay, that's really what I wanted. However, I had not stopped smoking pot or drinking. Now, I like to share that my pot was organic, so I had no chemicals on my pot. And when I could afford it, I had really clean organic wine, right?
Yeah.
So, and then that, of course, went out the window because it's really expensive to drink organic sulfate-free wine. So
Yes.
I share that, and I've shared it a lot of my story because I believe my story, well, it's part of my life journey, but it's also transparency, being able to talk about it, and there's a little bit of keeping me sober underneath that, right?
Yeah.
So I
So,
will, go ahead.
and Patty, I think that your story parallels so many other health coaches. For instance, on this podcast, we had Jolene Parks,
Hmm.
who was a functional nutritionist and health coach.
Mhm.
and drinking, and then drinking a little more, and then drinking a little more,
Oh,
and then became off and running.
mhm.
And so I don't think you're alone in this little
Okay.
story of yours.
Okay, well that's great because I felt alone because it was such a contradiction, right? And
Sure.
but what I knew was I wanted to feel happy and balanced and free. And I
Mhm.
didn't really find that until I met you and Julia Ross and the amino acid therapy and created the 5-star pro recovery diet, which I will get into, which is why I'm wearing my apron too, because I thought it was important to wear my apron, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But my journey as a health coach, a lot of stress came up in my life. Again, I was still drinking, even though I was learning about nutrition. As a
Mhm.
health coach, I was learning about Ayurveda, and I was learning about, metabolic typing and blood type. But the bottom line with all of it was, as health coaches, the school that I went to, we were learning what affected your health, what things in your life affected your health. So it wasn't just nutrition, it was your environment, your relationships. And so for me, I was really looking at my relationship with my spouse, which I ended after I graduated, but I was not looking at my relationship with my addiction. And for
Right.
some reason, that didn't come up at all in our training. And
Mm.
I'm hoping they're talking more openly about it now. Um, but
Hope so.
but it's one of those, people don't like to talk about it as much, because it's
They don't. It's really unfortunate. So many of the functional nutrition schools out there and health coaching schools ignore mental health and especially ignore addiction. And it's tragic because, as you know, this is why I started the academy
Mhm.
to teach not just mental health professionals how to apply nutrition
Right.
to people in recovering with mental health issues, but also nutritionists, how to apply all the wonderful information you have specifically to this area.
No question about it. And so I'm originally from New York. I live now in Salt Lake City, Utah, which is where I got sober. And I know
Mm,
you know the story, but for our listeners, so this is so interesting too, because 20 years ago on Valentine's Day, 20 years ago, I got on a plane from JFK. My family did a pretty terrible intervention with me because I was dying. I realized, like addiction, I stopped eating. All the things we know now, I
mhm.
stopped eating. I was severely depressed. I had the anxiety that was just off the charts, but I didn't know about amino acid therapy. None of that was
No,
available to me then. All
no,
I knew
no,
was I need to drink so I don't jump out of my skin.
right.
And it was
You
horrifying.
also Yeah, you also, you say you hadn't looked at your relationship with addiction. You also hadn't looked at your relationship with trauma.
Correct.
And this is why I talk about the three-legged stool, that
Yes.
addiction is biochemical slash nutritional, psychosocial, and spiritual.
Oh,
And all three are happening at about the same time, or all three are happening at the same time, need to be addressed at more or less the same time, but we have to have a well-fed functioning brain in order to do the rest of the work of recovery, which is what you were missing was the well-fed brain,
correct.
even though you tried.
I tried, but it didn't quite make it. And I realized that was part of, excuse me, my soul journey was to go through what I went through.
Yes.
But I made it. A lot of people don't make it. A lot of people don't have suicidal thoughts and don't carry that out. And that's why we're doing what we're doing. And that's
Yeah.
why we're reaching out to people. And I want to, if I get to a story of a woman who was suicidal the other night and how aminos turned her life around, I'll come back to that
Okay.
because it was just a few days ago. So anyway, I came out here, and I ended up in the emergency room. My sister was actually planning my funeral, and it was the last drink that I had, and I wasn't eating. And when I woke up from that, I
Mhm.
was actually in a homeless shelter. which my family was like freaking out about, like Patty's in a homeless shelter, but it was a women and children's, and that was where I needed to be. I didn't
Hmm.
even know where I was. I mean, people giggle about this remark, but I thought I was at a hotel when I woke up. And I was like, wow, this is a pretty crummy looking hotel, and they have your on the license on the door is exactly your name on your license with your license driver's license number. And I was like, okay, I am not at a hotel. And so I was there for 6 weeks, and then I was placed in a treatment center that I work at today.
Nice.
And I teach nutrition and meditation there. They didn't have that there when I was there, but I did know that I needed protein. And I knew I needed to feed my brain back because I was starving in the treatment center. Because as we know, many treatment centers aren't feeding the the
No.
the foods, the brain foods that we need to get better. So, and
Right.
I like to share this because I was so laughed at in the treatment center, but we were being served like iceberg lettuce, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go out on the lawn, and I picked dandelions out of the lawn and put them in my salad, and then I
Good
would,
for you, Patty.
yeah, and then I would go through the pantry and get cans of salmon and tuna, anything that I could find because I do well with fish, and part of what I do is make sure that I get the protein in that I digest best. So I was
Right.
scouring for that protein, and I slowly started coming back. And then I had my sister drop me off protein shakes and green drinks, um, and slowly
Mhm.
my body I started coming back, and I stayed sober when I got out of the treatment center. Now this was almost 20 years ago. There were no sober living homes. They just didn't have them. So
Right.
I stayed on a woman's couch for a few days, and then I met a woman in AA, and she's like, "Well, you can come on up and stay with us. We have a sober home, and until you get on your feet." And I was like, "All right." So I ended up.
Aw.
I know. This couple was so blessed. I ended up on going to their home, and it was this beautiful home up in one of the canyons, and I was like, okay. I was just feeling so grateful, and I ended up staying for 3 years. I started cooking for them.
Okay, of course you did.
But beyond that, I found in her bookshelf, because we had some commonality in a health and wellness, and she was also in recovery. I found the mood cure.
Okay.
And I also found potatoes, not Prozac.
Both very powerful books.
Correct. And the potatoes, not Prozac was like really, it just turns, I was like, wait, because I was given Zoloft. Now, again,
Uh,
I knew nothing about aminos at that point. I was given Zoloft, and I was having a terrible reaction to it. I'm very chemically sensitive, which was really hard for me to be a successful addict. Or let's just say a functional addict. I was not one of those.
right, right.
And so that was interesting. I read both of those books, and then I'm like, oh my goodness, the light bulb went off.
Uh-huh.
I ended up going to a conference that Carolyn Rubin put on, who was the founder of the Alliance. I met you. I met Julia Stan Stokes at a conference in Sacramento. And then I ended up doing Julia's training back in San Diego, her first amino
Mhm.
training. And it was just like, and then of course you and I connected, and the Alliance, and now the Academy. And I've been a certified Academy coach for, my goodness, since the onset.
Lots of years.
Lots and lots of years. And the aminos were uh just that missing piece too, because as you said, of trauma, my brain was dysregulated in all the neurotransmitters. So serotonin, dopamine, not as much, but for sure serotonin, GABA, and particularly the endorphins. So, I realized from trauma, the endorphins have to do with very sensitive to the world. I've always been sensitive chemically, and
Right.
I've always been sensitive anyway to sounds and lights and chemicals.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
those were really low for me. So I really needed to address my low serotonin and my low endorphins, and my blood sugar. So I'm also hypoglycemic, which we talk a lot about. You certainly talk a lot about. In fact, I was at the treatment center here, and it's a men's group, men's treatment center, I had them read your hypoglycemia article.
Oh, did you? The
Oh, yeah.
hypoglycemia, anger, and relapse?
Absolutely. And they were like, light bulbs were going off for these guys because that's what's might be missing. And yes, they all there with trauma as well too, but getting them to look at, oh my goodness, it could be like I'm eating cereal every morning with sugar and dairy if I'm allergic to dairy and they just aren't feeling
Yeah,
well.
yeah. Well, one of the things that really struck me about your trauma story is that when bad things happen in your family, you turn to sugar.
Oh yeah,
You turn to sugar to cope and
correct.
to feed those really depleted, stressed out neurotransmitters, so that you could step up and get on with life. And this is sometimes why we turn into addictive substances, including sugar, is just to get on with life until we find what we actually need to get on with life in a full, wonderful way.
Oh, absolutely. And my very severe trauma happened when I was 10, and my father was a chiropractor, and you know a little bit of this, but we didn't have sugar in our house. My father was writing a book on sugar. This was the 60s, right? And
Right.
we weren't, he would send away for these little protein bars, which I think is so fun. But we never had sugar. We used to have to hide our Halloween candy from him. Like he was allow us a little bit. So when he
Mm-hmm.
died tragically, when I was 10, we lost that. And my mom was 38 with six children.
Yeah.
And she wasn't cooking anymore.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
my sisters took over. They were teenagers and we had Franco-American spaghetti, and I was like, and so and I spent a lot of time with my cousin at my aunt's house, and they just did sugar. I would wake up and have a bowl of Captain Crunch, and then an hour later I'd be starving and anxious, and I'd have a bowl of Cocoa Krispies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you had a increasingly starving brain.
Oh, completely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is, as we know, it's a systemic issue. It's trauma, but it's also education. We're not
That's right.
This is part of why the academy is so vital, and anyone else doing this work with nutrition and mental health and
Mm-hmm.
addiction, because we have to feed the brain. It's a non-negotiable.
Found, right. Foundational.
Foundation, that's the word.
Yeah. Yeah.
Foundational. Yes.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. So
mhm.
that's how you started.
You're right.
And so where are you today, Patty?
Well, today I'm almost 20 years sober, so that's a fantastic thing. And sugar still, I have to play with sugar a little bit. I have to watch it. Like I'm just not one of those people that can eat any sugar, anytime. So that is something I work with, I but you can make, and this is where my food stuff comes in. You can make delicious gluten-free cookies and treats that are actually good for your brain. We don't have to cut everything out. We just have to upgrade it and take
Yeah.
those junk sugars out and put in, more natural sugars, and even just a little bit, a little bit of maple syrup. I mean, I do more of my baking with monk fruit when I bake.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually don't bake a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I do like a good cookie. But that sweet thing can still come in through fruit, a more complex sugar. Um,
Right. 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 And again, as a treat rather than as a staple.
as a treat, no
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
And just after we eat, sometimes we all like a little bit of that sweet. So
Mm-hmm.
I have that. And sometimes I don't crave that, but sometimes I just need a little bit of that sweet. And that's also part of Ayurveda. So Ayurveda is the science of life. It's parallels yoga. And Ayurveda talks about the six senses, and one of them is sweet. So having a little bit, we don't have to get rid of it. We just have to have a little bit of it and make sure that we're getting in, our three macros, which is protein, fats, and complex carbs. And
Right.
when we have those coming in, then our bodies are fed, our brains are fed, and we can have that little sweet and not have a whole bunch of sweets.
and not have a whole bunch of sweets.
Hmm.
So on that note, Patty, what was your 5 star? And we'll talk about 5 star pro recovery diet in a minute. What was
Okay.
your 5 star pro recovery diet breakfast?
Well, I actually did a little video on it because I was like, I'm going to share this with Christina this morning. So, again, it's looking at the three macronutrients, right? The three first stars of the 5 star
Mhm.
pro recovery diet: protein, good fat, and complex carbs. So I took a box of the Power Greens. Well, first of all, I had leftover turkey burgers. And so when I make the turkey burgers, I usually put in carrots and leeks and some spices, some herbs, so that it's actually you're getting some complex carbs mixed in with the protein.
Mhm.
So we make these burgers and then we have a couple of them left over. So I took one of those that I made 2 nights ago, and then I chopped up some of the Power Greens and I put it on a little dish. I put a little water on the bottom, but you could put a little, olive oil. You could put a little ghee on there. I'm trying to watch the fat intake for me right now with my liver, so I just put sprinkled water on the bottom, and then I
Mhm.
chopped them up. I laid them on the bottom, and I chopped up the turkey burger, and I sprinkled that around, and then I was like, okay, I need my omega-3. So I was like, and I'm gonna bake it. So I just sprinkled walnuts, chopped up walnuts that I had.
Oh, sure.
So I sprinkled some chopped up walnuts and sea salt, and then I just baked it. And it was delicious. I
Right.
mean, that could also be a lunch, it could be a dinner. You don't have
Sure.
to have like a traditional breakfast, You just want to make sure
Sure.
you're getting in that protein. And that was my breakfast this morning.
There you go.
And this is my tea that I wanted to share as well with you.
Mhm.
So
It
this
looks
is a di
beautiful. It's a
it does
gorgeous color.
So I made it in a little I have a French press here that I use just for tea, and it's the easiest way to make tea. Plus, you don't have to have a lot of the bags. So this is an Ayurvedic tea. It's called the CCF tea, and that stands for coriander,
Ooh,
cumin, fennel.
yum.
And I have had such great success with this tea with if I have indigestion or if I ever have
Right.
heartburn, this is the best thing that works.
Mhm.
And it's a very ancient tea, but I would have never thought about it unless I knew a little bit about Ayurveda, and then someone turned me on to it many years ago. And
Right.
it's equal amounts of the seeds, and you just brew the seeds up and
And
you
they're
can drink.
all anti-gas. So if people have any problem with gas and bloating,
Hmm.
these 3 seeds have a wonderful history
Yes.
of reducing flatulence of any sort.
Absolutely. It's so
Mhm.
I made some of that too, mainly to show and share with you because I've used that quite a bit when I've had indigestion a little bit after eating.
Right.
So there you go.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yes. So you want me to share a little bit about the 5 star pro recovery diet?
Yes, because that's actually one of the modules in our level 1 training through the academy. And you and I kind of came up with it together, although it was mostly you. Um, so tell us about it, please.
Yes. So the 5 star pro recovery diet, well, actually, if you do remember, it started with the pro recovery diet.
Which
And
was
that was
Julia
when you and
Ross.
Julia and I worked together. And then, which is wonderful. So the pro recovery diet is the first 3 stars, which is
Mhm.
the 3 macros. And a lot of people might relate to understanding about the macros. Unless you're studied nutrition, you may not know about that, but we all need protein, we need fat, and we need complex carbs. So that's the first 3 stars of the 5 star pro recovery diet, which is essential to get into our bodies. We need this
That's
food
right.
to make our cells and to make our neurotransmitters
Regularly, every day,
regularly.
and at least 3 to 4 times a day, unless for some reason you have to restrict temporarily.
Correct.
Um, our blood sugar requires this very steady feeding.
Absolutely. And I'm going to come back to the other 2 stars, but while we're talking about regular intervals, I have people also often ask questions, what do you think about intermittent fasting? Especially they're in treatment. And I'm like, no, Not now.
Not now. Maybe later.
Maybe
Maybe
later.
later once the adrenals have stabilized and other things have stabilized. But the fact is, Patty, that if people have been living on the 5-star pro recovery diet for several years, rather than a ultra processed food diet, rather than a junk food diet, their metabolism is going to regulate on its own, and they may not actually need intermittent fasting to re-regulate a screwed up metabolism.
Beautifully said and so true. Because we're actually eating clean food that turns into our cells.
Yes.
We are walking food. So you're right with that. And I see a lot of people thrown off course with fasting. So just a reminder, if you are watching this, you may be one of those people who has a faster metabolism and need to eat more, but particularly if you're in early recovery. And it's a little tricky, as we know, Christina, because a lot of folks, well, there are just folks that don't really like to eat. And in Ayurveda, those folks are it's a dosha, a nature constitution called Vata, and they forget to eat. They're just not that interested in food. They're artists, they can be all sorts of things, but they're not necessarily remembering, I can't wait to make my food. So for those folks who have more of that nature, I have them set timers. I'm like, well, set a timer every 4 hours. Oh, time to eat, time
Right.
to
Right.
self-care and eat. So, but the intermittent fasting can just throw so much off, that your brain is just, again, like you said, starving. And if for people that aren't go ahead.
Well, I want to talk about that for a moment because the
Okay.
way you know that you're having trouble with intermittent fasting is if by the end of your fasting window, you are irritable and you're cranky and your family wishes you would eat and you're hungry and you're wishing you could eat. And when your eating window opens, all you want to do is binge
Binge.
because you're hungry. And people for whom intermittent fasting is okay, they're actually okay. They can make it through the fasting window without blood sugar dropping and adrenaline kicking in.
Right.
They can flow with it when their eating window opens. They can make really good choices for themselves, and they're fine. And for those people, intermittent fasting is working beautifully and it's
Right.
probably helping. For other people, not so much.
Correct.
And that's when you know that either you need breakfast, or some people who, for whatever reason, want to continue on with the intermittent fasting. This is where the amino acid glutamine comes in beautifully
Mhm.
because it feeds the prefrontal cortex. It turns up that adrenaline response.
Mhm.
It makes you a nice person again, and it allows you to flow through the rest of your fasting window until you're ready to eat again.
Right. And I had this image of people white knuckling it.
Right.
Right. I'm
Yeah.
just gonna get through this. Your body doesn't want a white knuckle. Your brain doesn't want a white knuckle. And I see it in a lot of the rooms of recovery, people just white knuckling their recovery because they're not eating. They come in with Diet Cokes, they're not eating, they're eating junk. And I'm like, oh,
And
so
then they wonder why they have post-acute withdrawal, why they're
exactly.
depressed, why they're anxious, and where the serenity that the program promises, it's like it's missing. Where is it? I can't find my serenity. And it's because people are not feeding their brains. And Patty, I see this over and over with my people who have chronic relapse because I
Yes.
had a practice for 20 years in Denver with people who'd been through 4 or 5 or 6 programs, who were going to 3 meetings a day by bus because they didn't have a driver's license anymore. And yet it wasn't sticking. And
Mm,
when I asked them what they were eating, they weren't. They were having their coffee with sugar, they were having their donuts, they were, doing the whole junk food thing.
mm,
When I asked them why, or like, did you have breakfast? Did you have lunch? Did you have a snack? They say, no, I can't be bothered with that.
Uh,
And that's not my language. This was their language.
I know.
It
Mm,
was just so out of their realm, and nobody had told these people after 5 or 6 or 7 programs that what they ate mattered to their recovery, and that when they ate mattered to their recovery.
mm,
Nobody had told them this. And so I come along, and so they feel like failures. They feel constitutionally incapable of sobriety or
yep.
recovery or
Hmm.
even abstinence.
Hmm.
And then I come along and ask what they ate for breakfast. And when was the last time you had protein prior to your last relapse? And they say, yesterday.
Oh my gosh.
And then I suggest, well, why don't you try for 1 week eating 20 grams of protein every 4 hours? And let's see what happens. And almost immediately the cravings stop. And when the cravings stop, the relapses stop. And emotional stability comes in, and the brain starts working again, and people feel more stable, and people
Mm,
are able to problem solve, and people are more able to now engage in the rest of the work of recovery. The trauma healing, the socialization, the everything else you need to do to really
hmm.
thrive in life. Once you have a well-fed brain, you can do it. And these people kept saying to me, how come nobody ever told me this before? How come?
Well, this is the systemic issue of education in our country, in our world, really. We're not learning about nutrition. I mean, here's an example. One of my friends in recovery, her daughter, now this is 2025. Her daughter's home ec class. They were making Rice Krispie treats with chocolate icing. That was what
Mm,
they were learning to eat to feed this 14, 15-year-old's brain. And I'm
mm,
thinking, ah, oh, we need to get into the schools, like still, I
right.
mean, unless you're going to Waldorf or some of the alternative schools that get it, that get nutrition,
Uh-huh.
but that's what they're learning. And then we have these enormous rates of Adderall use and substance use and suicide with these teens because
Because people
nobody's
are
eating and they're
miserable.
on their phone or their computer, right?
That's right. That's right. And the research that people with the higher rates of suicide have the lowest body levels, blood levels of omega-3 fatty acids and even cholesterol.
Mm,
And this research has been done and verified and redone. And we know that we need enough cholesterol and enough omega-3 fatty acids, right? This is the second star of our five
yes,
stars,
fats. Hmm.
right? To because every brain cell, in fact, every cell in the body is coated with good fats.
Yeah,
And if we don't have them, our neurotransmitters, we could even be eating all the protein in the world, getting all the amino acids, but if we don't have the right fats in there, the signals are not going to get to where they go. And again, we're going to be miserable and maybe
absolutely.
even suicidal.
Absolutely. One of my favorite giveaways to people is either a can of sardines or a can of mackerel,
Uh-huh.
because it's protein and omega-3 fats. So I
That's
love
right.
that you brought up the fats because it's such a, well, it's critical, right? And again, this is why we see, and I don't know the percentage now, but what is it? 85% of the relapse rates in treatment centers. Again, people go back in and in and in.
That's right.
And
And
it's
some
just,
treatment programs are feeding their people right, but
yes,
most treatment programs are not either teaching their clients how to cook. So
right,
people go back and default back to their old ways of feeding themselves
right.
because they don't know how to do it differently.
Hmm.
And then they start feeling like crap again and wonder why. And nobody's told them, well, it's because you're feeding your brain here in treatment. And now that you've gone home, you've stopped feeding your brain. And that's the difference. So that's one issue. And the other issue is people aren't taught that. They
Right.
aren't taught what the brain needs to function optimally. Science has shown us we know exactly the nutrients the brain needs to function optimally. And yet, this has never ever been part of the mental health or addiction conversation.
Right.
And people in recovery are not being taught this.
I agree. I agree. And it's so interesting so a lot of the work that I do, this already, is helping people get in
Mhm.
their kitchen and make their food and
Yes.
plan their food. And people are like, well, I'm not a chef. I'm like, oh, yes, you are. You just put some peanut butter on that apple, you're a chef,
There you go.
right? Like, this is part of it. And especially after COVID, everybody's used to getting takeout, not yet some people did switch over and get back into their kitchen, but this is where we need to like realize I can get into my kitchen and it's not that daunting and I can make some food for myself or have it in there so I can go in and sit down and have food and feed my brain and my cells. And because I
That's
think
right.
that's part of it too, and of course, yeah, the treatment centers, some, as you said, some are. So that's very hopeful to see that.
Some really are.
Yeah,
And this is why I hear that you're putting videos up on Instagram,
I
which is
am.
wonderful.
And
And I have my Nourish and Thrive kit on the Eating Protein Saves Lives website,
right.
which you're going to be sharing your videos
I
of
am
the
going to be sharing my
Nourish and
videos.
Thrive kit. So
Well,
all
and
of you out there can get Patty's wonderful creative recipes.
yes, yes, absolutely. And also I have a class called the Plate Up class. I'm not starting one up again until probably late spring. But there's also videos on that website. And you can go to Pati Reiss, Eat Well, Feel Fabulous on Instagram. Um,
Okay.
so I'm getting more of that out there, for sure. But the thing I wanted to share with your listeners is please get into your kitchen and even
Yes,
pick 3 proteins that you can keep in your kitchen that you can rotate. It doesn't have to be, fancy schmancy. You can, like I said, have some cans of mackerel and sardines in there. Have some walnuts. As you
that's
start
right.
doing this, it gets easier. And it doesn't have to be a fancy gourmet chefy thing. It can just be, hey, I'm going to make some food to feed my brain. And then all of a sudden it starts tasting better. And you're like, well, I'd like a little bit of that on my food. And I'd like a little bit of that on my food. But
That's
we
right.
do need
It
those.
becomes a lot less scary.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then your life just gets better because you're happier. I mean, I'm like, oh my gosh, this missing link that I waited so long to learn about. But it is what it is, right? So I wanted to share the other 2 stars on the 5-star pro recovery diet because again, this is part of what's taught through the academy. So if you're interested in a training with the academy, level 1, even if you're not using it professionally, you can use it for your kitchen, you can use it with your friends and family. It's just fantastic. So, and I'll be teaching this week for the academy. So there's 2 more stars that I want to talk about. The 4th star is personalized. And that's something that was a carryover from me being a health coach. We learned how, and we know this with the academy too, what might work for you might be a little different for me, right, Christina? We know that.
Right.
And so that's part of the 4th star, personalizing your food. And so how we teach about that is we look at blood type. You can also get allergy tests. A lot of people go that route, but I have found that if people just look at your blood type, that you can actually look at, oh my goodness, I actually do better with red meat, and I do better with turkey than red meat. Things like that help people understand, oh, okay, because the blood type is really ancestral. It's how our
That's right.
body reacts to certain molecules on the food, which are called lectins. So those are just, that's one way to personalize it. And again, what works for you? Do you feel good after you've had that protein and that fat? That's probably good for you. If you're having
Mhm.
indigestion, then you may want to switch it around and personalize it more for you. The 5th star is the one we all kind of go throw our hands up about, and that's eating clean. Like what's happened to our food? It has been hijacked. So we know that we are taking in so many toxins in our food that harm our brain. And so, here we're getting rid of drugs and alcohol, right? And then we're still eating foods with chemicals and drugs in them. I don't know if I want to say drugs, but chemicals in there and pesticides that are changing our hormones, that are making our brains like just overloaded. So, we really want to start cleaning up our food and making it a priority to figure out where your food's coming from. And
That's right.
you can. Mhm.
Because it's not just overloading our brains, it's overloading our livers. And
Yes.
people in early recovery, especially if you have a history of heavy alcohol use or heavy meth use, especially those two, but others as well, have
Mhm.
very stressed out livers.
Mhm.
Liver's been working overtime. It can be backed up. Our liver processes all of our toxins. And so, yes, we may stop drinking or we may stop using meth, but we're still eating foods that contain dye and preservatives and this and that and the other
The
and
trans
glyphosate
fats.
and actual toxins that our liver has to detoxify. And our livers are saying, ah, ah. And so what happens? We have brain fog. We
Mhm.
have body aches and pains.
Up.
We're slow. We're sluggish. We don't have motivation. We don't have get up and go because this is what toxicity does to us. And then we don't have the drive it takes, not actually because our dopamine's low, but because our liver is so overloaded. And all of these toxins actually interfere with the firing and production of our neurotransmitters. So then we don't have the get up and go to do the rest of the work of recovery because I just don't feel well.
Bingo.
I
Bingo.
don't feel well.
No.
And I just want to sit in front of TV. And I may not be sitting in front of TV with my beer, but I'm sitting in front of TV with my popcorn or my
Soda.
Captain Crunch or my Mountain Dew or right? And then the downward spiral is still downwardly spiraling.
Correct. Oh boy. And so many times, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners too know that, like, their relapse maybe because they haven't eaten, but they've been eating a lot of junk because they feel
Yeah,
so crummy. And when you
that's right.
feel crummy, you're more apt to go use. You just want to like take it away. I'm just like, I don't feel good. I'm gonna take something to take this away, right?
Yeah, I'm done.
I'm done. I'm done. And we want people to thrive. This isn't just about surviving. The
No,
academy and our work is about thriving. And like, um, I want to tell you this funny story because I love sharing this. I was about 8 years sober, and I was with my nephew who was up at the University of Utah and some of his college friends, and we were just hanging out. I think I was at his house. I stopped by and maybe brought him some food or something. And when I left, they said to my nephew, and my nephew, of course, is telling me the story. They're like, "Hey, dude, what drugs is your aunt on?" I love sharing that story. And he's like, she's not on any drugs. She's sober. She does amino acids and food and she goes to AA. And it was just, and I share that because we're supposed to feel happy most of the time. Are we going to be sad
that's
and
right.
frustrated? Of course we will.
That's
Grief
right.
is real. We're going to have loss. I've been through so much loss in this recovery and I never picked up. And I was able to be present through my mom's death, my sister's death. Absolutely.
Endorphin.
Endorphin. You talk about the aminos. Oh my goodness. So this is this is the beautiful miracle of nutrition and mental health and addiction.
Yeah, yeah. It really truly is. Patty, you wanted to share, we're going to be stopping in a moment, but
Okay.
you wanted to share the story about the suicidal person.
Yes. Yes. I actually have a few miracle stories, but I'll just stick with this one. So
Hey,
on that,
how about two?
I'll do
Share
two.
two miracle stories with
Okay, I'm
us.
gonna finish with two miracle stories. So this is a dear friend of ours, and his wife has been addicted to Mountain Dew, um, Adderall. But she
Hmm.
was using other I think she was using caffeine pills too, just to have energy. Um,
Sure.
and I worked with both of them and the family for a little while, and then things kind of slipped away. And I ended up going to their wedding about 5 months ago, and she was emaciated. And I was alarmed at that point because I hadn't seen her or him for a while, and I was like, oh boy, okay, we're in trouble here, right? Because eating wasn't her thing either, right? But getting stuff done was. So I actually called my friend and has said, how are things going? And he said, not great. I'm having, she's coming off Adderall and then I heard her in the background. Like I heard, and I thought it was their 3-year-old. I thought it was their toddler. And she was just irate. And it was that I was like, whoa, I said, either okay, you need to take her to the ER. Like I was concerned that much that she needed actually to go to the ER or go into treatment, but I knew she probably had to detox and I didn't know what she was doing.
Hmm.
But I have to share this because apparently someone else had given them some, um, and this brings in plant medicine, gave them some mushrooms, they were microdosing.
Okay.
Okay, so microdosing to take the edge off, and I'm like, are she eating? No, I'm not eating, but we're microdosing. So I'm like, oh, okay, okay. So I said, ER detox, or I can give you a protocol that she has to do, and you have to help her do it. And then I'm not going to give the protocol here because it's not my place to do that. But it was basically the replacement that we know in amino acids for Adderall and also balancing out her serotonin because she was suicidal.
Hmm.
And this was two days ago. And the next morning I was checking in, like, do you need to take her in? How's she doing? He goes, oh my gosh, things have shifted. Wow, things
Hmm.
have shifted. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So, and I kept saying, get her some fish, open up a can of mackerel. He goes, I just bought a bunch of like salmon, frozen salmon. I said, just feed her that every 4 hours. And it shifted. So it
Yeah.
can be quick like that. Um, it can be that quick. And I was, all I was saying was the safety first and get her into an emergency room. But they
Right.
didn't have to go that route. But I think she was scared enough and he was scared enough. And so that's a miracle story that just happened.
Nice. I like that miracle story.
And the other one is a client I've had for quite some time, for several months, and we've been just doing Zoom um,
Hmm.
coaching because I do Zoom coaching. I don't see everybody in person. He's actually from New York, and he um, um, he couldn't figure out Zoom anymore. So that was already a little indication that something cognition, like his cognitive abilities weren't working because he was fine on Zoom for a while, and then we just had to FaceTime. So I realized we were FaceTiming, and all along for the last
Downward spiral.
downward spiral, right? Things start not being able to do things. You can't figure stuff out, and I know that. So this was like 7 weeks ago. I'm FaceTiming with him, and he's just like gagging. I thought there might be some drinking going on, but I didn't know much, and there was a lot of vagueness about when I was coaching with him. And I said, I was working with his father too, and um, I said, listen, we probably need to not connect today. And I called his dad and I said, get him into the ER, like today. And he did. He went and got him, brought him into the ER. And he had a massive seizure as soon as he walked in.
Mhm.
He had been drinking, not eating, da 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 da, right? So he was in the hospital for 2 weeks, and basically he was detoxing and he was having a really difficult time. And his dad is filling me in on the trauma that he went through. He couldn't walk. He lost his ability to walk. He was falling out of the bed. I mean, this was like, and I was like, oh, just praying, like, oh.
This is
So,
about as late stage as you can get.
yes, late
Yeah.
stage. And
Yeah.
and you know about this, so we started getting him on a little bit of the aminos while he was still on some medication there.
Mm.
And what happened was, I think a God thing or a universe thing, whatever you want to say, but no, we were trying to get him into a rehab. Now, the difficulty with this particular client was that he needed a physical rehab because he couldn't walk. He was having neurological stuff going on too, and he had a brain injury, but he also had addiction. So it's really hard to
Yeah.
find a place that does both. And he was
Right.
getting rejected from everywhere. Nobody was taking his insurance. He was also on Medicaid. Blah. So the only option was him to go back to his father's place for a little while and do some of the protocol that we learned from the academy that I recommended. Uh, and then look for a treatment center. So he was planning to go to a treatment center. We were going to get him in once he was stabilized. The hospital bed came into his father's apartment. So he did have a hospital bed so he wouldn't fall out of bed. And I am telling you, day by day, I was checking in, and this man's brain was coming back online again. And the early pictures, I saw pictures of him, and he was early 50s, but he looked like he was in his late 90s. He was hunched over, and now I haven't seen him in person because I'm coaching, he's still back in New York. It's like, so this works. This
Yeah.
works. He
It
started
does.
doing
Yeah.
smoothies and food and aminos and nutrients again, and he gets it, and he's doing some recovery work as well too. Um,
Uh-huh.
but that
Excellent.
is an incredible miracle story that I'm so delighted to share.
Yeah, I love stories like this.
Mhm,
Absolutely.
mhm.
Well,
Yeah,
good for you, Patty. And
yeah,
I think something this story really illustrates is that when somebody starts out as ill and as late stage as this gentleman
yes.
was, you don't start with steak and potatoes. You start with very gentle, very nutrient dense food that's
Mhm.
easily digestible.
Yes,
That hopefully somebody can do for you, like he had
right.
his dad
It
at
was
first. That's why he'd gone downhill in the first place, because he wasn't capable of cooking for
no,
himself. He didn't have anybody to do it for him.
correct. And I absolutely, and I want to just interject here. He was in a really great treatment center. It was a holistic treatment center. He did fabulous. He got
Yeah,
home, he stopped eating,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
He stopped taking his supplements. He just stopped. Bingo.
He
And then, that came in too. So yes, in the early part, it was basically bone broth and shakes.
hmm
And liquid omegas, and liquid vitamins, just things that his body could actually absorb because his gut was just a mess, as you would
Right.
imagine. Yeah. So, um, yay.
Nice, nice.
Yes, yes. So, well,
I think we're good,
I
Patty.
think
This
we're
was
complete.
wonderful.
And that's my
Excellent.
website right on there. If people can see that, patireiss.com. If people want to reach out to me and find out more about my classes or my coaching or the academy. Um,
Okay. And the resources will be in the notes as well. But what I'm looking forward to, Patty, is we get to see each other again in person at the conference coming up in Columbus in end of April, beginning of May.
I know.
You're going to be our master of ceremony,
Yes, I'm
which
so
is going to
excited
be
about
so
that.
much fun. You
Mhm.
get to channel your little cheerleader.
Yes, my qigong. We'll be doing some qigong there too, some breath work too. But I'm
Wonderful.
excited about that. I like that you said channel my little cheerleader. And can I just add one thing that you said to me many years ago, Christina Veselak?
Okay.
So
Okay.
your wisdom and guidance to so many has been glorious. But the one thing you said to me years ago, you referred to me as the self-care prophet. And I have shared that quite a bit because one of the things that we do know we have to do is self-care,
That's
which
right.
which this gentleman did not do. He's doing it now. He has his own apartment now. It's unbelievable. He moved during all of this, but we must self-care. And until we can self-care, we have to also receive help from someone.
That's right. But Feeding ourselves the right foods for our body and our stage of recovery is the core and key of self care.
Mm,
It's the
it is the
foundation of
core.
self care because it's the foundation, Patty, of self love, right? The way we were all loved as tiny itty bitty babies were by being fed. And now it's our jobs to love ourselves through feeding ourselves
Mm,
the foods that allow us to thrive and feel
mm.
good and grow into the fullness of who we were created to be.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And thank you for being so much a part of my thriving recovery in life.
very, very, very welcome.
Mm.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening.
Mhm.
And please share this episode with your communities. And please like us. And I'll see you next time.
Okay, blessings to everybody. Eat well, feel fabulous.
Eat well. All right. We did it.
We did it.
Thank you for tuning in to Power Up Recovery with Nutrition. I'm Christina Veselak, your host, and I hope today's episode has inspired and equipped you with new insights and tools to support your recovery journey or practice. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others who could benefit from the knowledge shared here. Stay connected with us for more episodes filled with practical advice, expert wisdom, and inspiring recovery stories. Remember, nutrition is a powerful tool in mental health and relapse prevention. Power up your recovery today. I'm Christina Veselak, and I'll see you next time.